Recently married to my husband Scott, I found myself acquainted with a new addition to the family, my sister-in-law, Abigail. Yet, amidst the honeymoon glow, a strange call from her interrupted the tranquility. "Len, are you there?" she asked. Though I was listening, her words seemed to dance away from comprehension. "Okay, one more time," I requested. "Your cruiser crashed into an iceberg." "Yep, that's the gist," Abigail confirmed, her tone teasingly light. Perplexed, I attempted to untangle this bizarre tale. Firstly, I didn't own a cruiser. Secondly, what iceberg? We resided in Los Angeles, a far cry from Arctic or Antarctic waters. Abigail, bless her unconventional soul, often found herself in peculiar situations. Was she confused or merely pulling my leg? I'm still not following. Care to elaborate? I inquired, a hint of exasperation seeping into my voice. "Len, you're such a riot," she chuckled before launching into her explanation. Apparently, the story began during a visit to Scott's family home, where a family meeting awaited. Amidst introductions, Abigail noted my appearance, remarking on its resemblance to Japanese heritage, a fact that garnered compliments rather than scrutiny. Relief washed over me, replaced by gratitude for the acceptance I feared I might not receive. Yet the conversation took an unexpected turn when Victoria, my future mother-in-law, inquired about our Los Angeles abode. Curiosity turned to concern as their questions veered towards specifics about our home and car. Despite my reservations, the prospect of bonding with Scott's family prevailed, leading me to brush aside the unease lingering beneath their inquiries. I finally arrived, navigating through their inquiries about my relatives' homes in Los Angeles. I casually mentioned the house with a pool and my uncle's riverside abode, unwittingly sparking laughter from Victoria and her clique. It dawned on me then, their malicious amusement unveiled their intentions, exploiting my connections for a West Coast getaway. The realization struck hard they were poised to take full advantage of my familial ties. Yet voicing my concerns felt precarious. Complaining might risk their acceptance of our newly minted marriage, so I opted to endure, rationalizing that the trip wasn't imminent. By the time it materialized, I reasoned we'd be in a better position for a candid conversation. So, for the time being, I avoided broaching the subject. Despite my efforts to keep distance, Abigail persisted, escalating her contact frequency. Initially, it was manageable, a weekly check-in or a casual decline, but soon, it morphed into a relentless barrage. Excuses became my refuge, work commitments, driving, anything to deter the incessant reach-outs. With our marriage paperwork filed, Abigail's persistence reached new heights. Despite attempts at accommodation, her demands became overwhelming. And yet here she was again, calling at 8:00 p.m. with an invitation to hang out. "I have work tomorrow, sorry, I can't make it," I explained to Abigail, whose free time seemed boundless compared to my own. With a high school diploma and a part-time job, she likely had more flexibility, but as a full-time employee with weekday commitments, my schedule didn't afford such luxuries. Besides, now that I was married, household responsibilities beckoned, leaving little room for leisurely outings. "I have a meeting early tomorrow morning," I added, hoping she'd understand. "Stingy," Abigail retorted before abruptly ending the call. Her accusation perplexed me. True, I worked full-time, but my salary hardly qualified as lavish. Her comment lingered in my mind long after the call concluded, leaving me puzzled. The next day brought another unexpected call, this time from Victoria, Scott's mother. "Len, want to go shopping together?" she asked cheerfully. "I'm pretty busy with work," I replied casually, expecting the conversation to end there. But then Victoria uttered something peculiar. "You're rich, right, Len? I wanted to consult you about some brands I'm interested in." Her assumption caught me off guard. "I'm not rich," I replied, my confusion mounting. Victoria's reasoning was equally baffling. Did living in Los Angeles automatically equate to wealth? If so, did that mean all Los Angeles residents were affluent? Such thoughts swirled in my mind as I struggled to comprehend. "Sorry, did you just say something about being rich?" I questioned, seeking clarification. Victoria seemed unfazed by my query. "Aha, yes I did. What about it?" she replied casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm not rich," I reiterated, feeling the need to clarify, but Victoria's response only deepened my bewilderment. "But you lived in a house with a pool," she pointed out, as though it were an indicator of vast wealth. Her words left me speechless. As I sighed in exasperation, Victoria seemed to realize her mistake. Sorry, it was just a misunderstanding, she apologized, though her assumption still hung heavily in the air. With those words, Victoria abruptly ended the call, leaving me utterly puzzled. What was that all about? No matter how much I mulled it over, the answer remained elusive. Seeking clarity, I confided in Scott, who took it upon himself to confront Victoria and Abigail on my behalf. According to Scott, here's what had transpired. Upon learning that I resided in Los Angeles, particularly in a house with a pool, Victoria and Abigail jumped to a conclusion. Beverly Hills. In their minds, Beverly Hills equated to wealth, and by extension, so did I. While it wasn't unreasonable to associate affluence with Beverly Hills, their assumption was flawed. I lived in Los Angeles, not Beverly Hills. Yet they clung to their belief, probing me with questions about my home. Though I found their inquiries odd, I couldn't bring myself to fabricate a falsehood, unwittingly feeding into their misconceptions. While a house with a pool might be commonplace in California, it was almost unheard of in Birmingham, where I hailed from. It seemed Victoria and her entourage had misunderstood, thinking I was wealthy. Perhaps they saw my marriage as an opportunity to reap monetary benefits. Their frequent contact aimed to solidify this bond, hoping for some advantageous outcome. Eventually, Scott intervened, clarifying the misunderstanding. However, Victoria and her cohorts seemed disgruntled by the revelation. Perhaps they harbored visions of luxurious trips and nightly revelries, only to have their hopes dashed. Despite their disappointment, it was a relief that the misunderstanding had been cleared up. Sometime later, the dust settled and the incident faded into memory. When I broached the topic of wedding plans with Victoria's family, I couldn't help but wonder how they'd react if the misunderstanding persisted. Victoria surprised me, though, expressing concern about the wedding's extravagance. "What kind of wedding are you planning? You're not going for something too extravagant, right?" she asked, her tone cautious. Agreeing with her sentiment, I suggested a small, intimate affair with only close family, a notion she seemed to appreciate. Her concern was a welcome contrast, but Abigail remained somewhat aloof, casting doubt on our relationship. Her lack of participation in the wedding discussions was disappointing, yet our plans pressed forward nonetheless. A year later, our wedding day arrived, and despite some logistical challenges, it turned out to be a beautiful occasion. My parents made it from Birmingham in time for the ceremony, though my grandparents from Los Angeles couldn't attend due to travel constraints. Instead, my uncle Taylor, my mother's brother, stepped in, promising to capture the day through photographs for them. In the quiet moments before the ceremony, Taylor paid me a visit. He shared news about his company, which dealt with boat rentals, particularly cruisers and pleasure boats popular among young Americans. Proudly displaying a photo of a luxurious cruiser, Taylor revealed its staggering price tag, $3 million, his hearing impairment causing him to misinterpret my awe. As I marveled at the generosity, he unveiled another surprise, a picture of a pleasure boat, a wedding present for me. According to Taylor, his company had set it aside for my use whenever I visited his riverside home. Grateful, I thanked him sincerely. However, our private moment was interrupted by Abigail's sudden entrance. Her sly smile hinted at her eavesdropping outside the dressing room. Realizing she had overheard, I hesitated, knowing she'd likely insist on joining any boat excursions. Reluctantly, I acknowledged her presence, bracing myself for her inevitable inquiries about the newfound gift. "Taylor gave me a boat," I remarked, astonished by his generosity. Abigail's lack of enthusiasm was almost a relief. Taylor explained it was a second-hand boat from his company, a thoughtful gesture rather than disposing of it. Once Taylor left, I moved to the mirror to touch up my makeup. Catching Abigail studying the photo Taylor brought, I couldn't help but wonder if her disinterest was genuine. However, she vanished soon after, leaving me to ponder her motives. During our journey home, Victoria broached the topic of informing my grandparents about the marriage. Assuring her I had already done so, she suggested a visit, hinting at a family trip to the West Coast. Despite my reservations, Victoria persisted, revealing that Taylor had expressed his desire for us to visit. Although I doubted Taylor had heard Victoria's suggestion, I declined, not wanting to impose on him. Victoria's sudden change of demeanor, expressing concern for my grandparents, made it hard to refuse. Eventually, pushed by Victoria's persistence, we agreed to combine the trip with our honeymoon. Despite my initial reluctance, I found myself looking forward to reuniting with my grandparents and exploring the West Coast. With a positive mindset, I embraced the upcoming adventure, determined to make the most of it. Several months after the wedding, we embarked on our journey to the West Coast, utilizing our summer vacation for the trip. When I explained the situation to Taylor, he readily agreed to host us. So, with Scott, Victoria, Abigail, and myself, we headed to Taylor's house in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, my father-in-law couldn't join us due to work commitments. Nevertheless, it marked our first family trip since tying the knot, and I was eager to use this opportunity to strengthen our bonds. Upon arrival, we spent the day joyfully reuniting with my grandparents and introducing Scott to them. I also introduced Victoria and Abigail, and we all enjoyed a family gathering. Abigail's natural cheerfulness quickly endeared her to Taylor's family, and even Victoria seemed to be having a good time. It felt like we were taking a step closer to becoming a real family. The following day, my brother Kevin, who lived alone in San Francisco, came to visit. As we conversed, I realized Victoria and Abigail were nowhere to be found. Scott, who was helping my aunt, hadn't seen them either. Just as I began to worry, I received a call from Abigail. "Hey, Len," she exclaimed, bursting into laughter. "Where are you?" I asked, puzzled by her joviality. "It's a secret," she teased. "I just wanted to tell you something." "What?" I prompted, my curiosity piqued. "Your cruiser," she began mischievously. "I deliberately crashed it into an iceberg and sank it," Abigail confessed with uproarious laughter over the phone. That was the extent of her explanation. Trying to piece it together, I recalled something from the wedding day. Taylor had gifted me a pleasure boat. Abigail, eavesdropping on our conversation, might have mistaken it for the cruiser she mentioned. "Wait, if it's my boat, it's at my house," I clarified, recalling the pleasure boat at Taylor's. But Abigail was adamant, insisting she saw my cruiser sink before her. Confusion clouded the conversation as I reiterated, "I don't own a cruiser." Her persistence waned as she struggled to grasp the distinction between a pleasure boat and a cruiser. Realization dawned. The cruiser she mentioned belonged to Taylor. Just then, Taylor's frantic voice pierced through the phone, confirming my suspicion. Panicked, I urged Abigail not to move. In Los Angeles, seeking a boat and fleeing was no trivial matter. As Abigail's sobs reached my ears, I realized the gravity of the situation. "Mom, help me," she pleaded desperately to Victoria, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know, Abigail, you did it on your own. Help me." Taylor and Abigail seemed to pass blame back and forth. As long as they stayed put, I felt relieved. Hastily, I contacted Scott and made my way to the marina where Taylor's cruiser was docked. The marina was only a few minutes' drive away, but upon arrival, I found several police officers already on the scene. In a state of shock, Taylor recounted the events. Early that morning, Abigail and Victoria had requested to go on the cruiser, but their strong Alabama accent made their English difficult to comprehend. Taylor assumed they wanted to borrow the cruiser, which he found confusing given their pronunciation. Seeking Abigail's perspective, she explained, "I kept telling Taylor to let me on Len's cruiser." However, Taylor struggled to understand her. "You actually said that?" I questioned, puzzled. "Yeah, but he didn't quite understand me," Abigail admitted. "I think I get what she's trying to say," I mused, considering the possibility of a miscommunication. Checking with Taylor about what he heard, he clarified, "Lisa's cruiser." The pronunciation wasn't far off, and with Abigail's strong Alabama accent, it wasn't surprising it was misinterpreted. Taylor, recognizing Abigail's persistence, assumed she wanted to lease a cruiser for an extended period. Mistaking his kindness for permission, Abigail boarded his own cruiser, believing it to be mine. It seemed like a simple misunderstanding, but one question lingered. "Why did you want to sink my cruiser?" Abigail's motive became clear. She believed I was hiding my wealth and sought revenge for what she perceived as a lie. While sinking a cruiser seemed extreme, it stemmed from her sense of betrayal. Still, questions lingered, and I confronted her about operating the cruiser without a license. "Had just kind of figured it out by watching Taylor," she admitted, a hint of guilt in her voice. According to Abigail, her intention was merely to cause a little trouble. However, her plan spiraled out of control when the cruiser moved unexpectedly, leading to its collision with the dock and subsequent sinking. Faced with a dire situation, she panicked and failed to call the police. Instead, she concocted a ludicrous story about hitting an iceberg, hoping to elicit a panicked response from me. Abigail's flawed reasoning stemmed from a Hollywood movie depicting a ship sinking after hitting an iceberg. Believing Hollywood filmed in Los Angeles due to nearby icebergs, she assumed their existence in the area. It was a bizarre and whimsical chain of events, but her intention was clear: to make me worry and rush to her aid. Scott scolded both Abigail and Victoria, and the matter was settled with repairs paid for by us. Despite Abigail's protests about her new job at a river cleaning company, it was a consequence of her actions. Meanwhile, Victoria's decision to work for Abigail's sake resulted in fewer contacts from her end. While I aimed to mend our relationships, it was essential for them to understand the consequences of their actions. As for Taylor's $3 million cruiser, I had yet to set foot on it, a lingering reminder of the turmoil caused by a simple misunderstanding.